Hi there, Chris here with another fresh tip for you all. In this video we are going to take a look at painting Sigvald the Magnificent from Age of Sigmar. As you can see, we have the model already left in sub-assemblies. We have the cloak bits, the main body and sword, the shield, the shoulder pads, and of course his head. You can see some of the parts have been left attached to the sprue, and I just simply cut away parts of the frame just to grab hold of. Just so that it makes painting these little sub-assemblies a little bit easier. But don't worry, we will cover basically freeing these bits and of course clearing them up and reattaching everything later on. We're going to work on the main armor of this guy, his shoulder pads and his body, and here I've simply applied a gloss black primer from Stynorez using an airbrush Patriot 105, spraying it around 25 psi. And I'm quickly just going to take some good old-fashioned silly putty to use this as a mask, just to protect the sword, because I just don't want a whole lot of color building up on the sword when we eventually get to that. We're going to use some Balthasar Gold from Citadel Air. We're going to use a Patriot 105. We're going to spray it around 20-25 psi, somewhere around that. And basically we are going to apply this as a primary base coat as we work our way around the model. Now, I could have also basically masked off the bit of cloth that kind of dangles between his legs and comes towards the back there. It's that big kind of teardrop shaped thing going on the back in there. We could have also masked off like the flesh areas, his hands and other areas like that, but I really wasn't too concerned about that, as we are just going to quickly lay this down. And of course, because we have this nice gloss black primer laid out, we get a nice shiny reflective metallic finish. And even with Citadel metallics, which in the past I have kind of criticized, on top of a gloss black primer, all metallics, in my experience so far with gloss black primers, come out really fantastic. So if you're not using Citadel, that's fine. I find though with the gloss black, it really does make a big difference. Rolector Gold from Citadel Air is next. I'm going to slap a little bit into the brush. You can see I just do a quick little test to make sure. And then with this, I'm going to spray up at the model so that we're building brighter color at the lower portions of each of the segment. Here you can see I'm using my thumb as a bit of a mask just to block off some areas, just so that I don't get too much spray into those areas. But again, really the whole point of this is so that we're kind of going for a bit of a non-metallic metal type of look, and within that theory of laying color down in that regards to achieve that kind of particular look, the color builds to intensity, building brighter along the lower portions of each of the little segments of armor. So you can see there's more gold on the torso towards the belly. I also come in and hit the top of the chest a little bit more as well, just right on the pectorals. The forearm, you see that there's a little bit more on the forearm portion, like on the underneath of the forearm. Here I'm spraying a little bit more gold towards the end of the shoulder pad, as well as the portion that's closest towards the head, the big roundish part. But otherwise I spray kind of straight down at that. Again, these are mostly aesthetic choices. You can see here how we have a nice shiny gold. And again, like you can see how reflective all this is, and that is in part due to the gloss black primer that we're using. Here, I'm just going to simply lay a little bit of this Rolector Gold onto the palette, grab a detail brush, and begin just kind of reinforcing these highlights along each of the little segments of the armor, basically following each of the little muscle groups on his armor, as well as the little trim details that move around, and the little scroll work running down like the thigh pads and the shins and everything like that. But otherwise, with this color, it is pretty straightforward. We're just laying these highlights onto the lower portions of each of the segments of armor. So it's the forearms, it's the thighs, the chest. There's a little bit on his back, and of course the back of his calves and his feet. And he's basically covered in gold, right? So it's pretty straightforward. It's not quite like an edging. Basically, we are, again, just following along those little scroll details. And again, as long as you employ the same kind of theory as you would for non-metallic metal effects where you're using regular opaque colors, it gives you this really interesting metallic finish on a model, because basically so much light reflects back off these metallic finishes. And this is a really actually fun exercise for anybody who really wants to get into doing non-metallic metal, to kind of go about it in this fashion, because in fact the way the light plays on a metallic surface is basically what you're trying to emulate when you are using regular opaque colors. And if you are painting a model that is fairly common, like for example a Space Marine or something along those lines, you can basically emulate the effects, especially if you do enough of them and practice this particular technique enough times. You will see a commonality between all of them. Again, with this particular example here, I'm just again following along the scroll work and everything like that, and going around the edges. And it's really, really straightforward. It's nothing terribly complex. We're not going for any kind of wild, crazy blends, as a majority of any of those kind of transitions on the armor would have already been accomplished with the airbrush. Athematic blue and some Citadel contrast medium is next. The Athematic blue is a contrast paint. I'm going to slap 2 little drops onto my palette and a very generous amount. Basically, this should be more like a 2-to-1 type of mix ratio, but it's probably closer to more like a 1.5 to 1 kind of ratio. It's 1.5 medium to pigment. And here with this thinned out mixture, basically my intent is to build up some deeper color onto the higher portions of each of those little segments on the armor. So you can see here, like on the pectoral, I'm pushing the color closer towards the collar, and on each of the little ab muscles, it's on each of the little high points on each of those little groups right there. And again, because it's in a very thinned out consistency, the first layer is not terribly noticeable, but that is fine because we can slowly build up to our effect. It's actually better to slowly build up to an effect rather than just trying to lay it all down in one go. At some points here, you can see I will use it in a fairly generous fashion. And in fact, I follow along some of the other points on the model. It almost starts to look like oxidization at that point, but I kind of just run with it, and I really enjoy how having these really kind of rich tones kind of leveled out with these slight hints of a cool tone within the metal. And here again, I'm just simply following along. Now on this one leg, if we are really trying to be true to a non-metallic metal effect, more of the shin actually should have been a bit brighter than the other leg, but in fact it's kind of painted in a similar fashion to what everything else is. Here also I'm laying this color down like onto the shoulder pads, following around the scroll work, and getting into some of the little details and little nooks and crannies on areas. Again, it's a very subtle effect, and I will apply more than one layer, but as we apply more and more layers, the opacity, or I should say the finish, does change. As it dries, it becomes more satiny, but it actually pushes towards more matte. Here I'm using pure athematic blue. This is about 3 layers in after doing that previous glazing with the color to build up a slight transition. And again, it just allowed me to see where I was going. And the one thing I did notice is that because of the multiple layers with the paint and the mediums, it was knocking out a lot of that metallic shine. And that's fine if you don't really care about that sort of thing, but it does kind of look a little bit funny when you do have metallic finishes kind of go from a matte to a glossy like finish, and it just kind of looks a little bit odd. Rolector Gold and Roonfang Steel are next. The Rolector Gold is the Citadel Air, and the Roonfang is regular Citadel color, but there's nothing odd about adding or mixing these colors together. Here you can see I use a generous amount of water just to help thin the color out. And with this, I'm going to go around and apply this as a kind of final highlight along the bottom portions of each of those little segments of armor. I also move around on some of the trim like the areas that separate these details and everything like that. And basically we're just going to go and apply this like bright highlight under the bottom portions, again creating more contrast, but I really didn't want too bright a color with too much silver, as it would just kind of pull away from that nice warmth that we've created with these browns. And then of course throwing that slight blue-green into the mixture with the ethermatic blue, it almost has the effect of being a bit of a oxidization type look, which I'm also fine, because it also gives the armor kind of a brass feeling, which, you know, I'm just kind of running with here. Roonfang steel, Rolector gold. We're going to slap a little bit of Roonfang steel down, and we're going to use a little bit of Rolector gold. It's probably more like a 1.5 silver to 1 gold. It's mostly silver, and here the final highlight is just like a fine little tick along little areas. And basically we're just going through each of the little muscle groups, catching the very bottom portion of each of those little details, and that's really all it takes. Sometimes it might be just a tiny little dot, sometimes it's a tiny little line or a little teardrop shape, or, you know, along these. I think you guys kind of get my meaning here. Again, with this final highlight, it is a very minimal step. And of course I also go around catching some of the little trim details, the vine details, and also some edge highlighting on like the vambraces, on his collar, on his knee pads, and anywhere where, you know, or in his hip armor there as well. I also catch some of those high points. And again, it is really just to catch just the high points and really bring prominence to a lot of these really fun little details on the model. I also did avoid going another route with this paint job as well, because I had considered using like a chrome paint and then laying colors on top and then things of that. And I thought, no, I'll stick to just kind of a typical fashion in which we paint these models. A little bit of Agrax Earthshade is next, and this is going to be fairly quick. I'm just basically drawing this right out of the bottle, and then I'm laying a little bit down, and then I really quickly just come through and just soak up the excess. I just dry the brush off really quick and then just pull the excess out anywhere. And really with this phase, it's really more for those muscles along the sides of the ribs. It's just bring more contrast there, and anywhere else where I wanted to create more separation. But that is it. That's the final phase. Again, to bring back a bit of that metallic shine, you could also thin out Rolector gold into a glaze consistency and apply that just over each of the plates, and it'll give you that slight metallic shine back. But that's it. Stay tuned for part 2, where we'll take a look at the sword. A big thank you to my patrons. Without their support, these videos would not be possible. If you're considering Patreon support, click the link in the description below. You'll be taken off to a magical website called Patreon, where there are varying tiers of support, and a huge thank you to everybody who does. Take care of those brushes, and they will take care of you.